Hello, dearies and dudes. My name is Snyderman. This is Snyderman Teaches, the series that looks at historic events and their importance to modern society. It's been a while since we've done one of these. I think Thankmas was the last time we had one, so I do apologize for that, but these take time. I want to do them justice, and I started focusing on streaming, so my time was kind of limited in setting one of these up. But we're back, and we're ready to do some learning, and this is actually super cool. This is the first episode in a mini-series of Snyderman Teaches. For the next 5, 6 episodes, not quite sure how many it's going to take me, we are going to look at World War II. And here we go. Before we dive into World War II, it's important to understand, or it's important for you to know, I want to be upfront with you, that this episode, episode 1 of this mini-series, is not going to talk about Hitler, at least directly. Sorry. Because before we dive into Hitler, and before we dive into all the battles of World War II, and before we get into all that, we have to talk about what led up to World War II and what caused Hitler to come to power to essentially spark World War II. So, in order to do that, we need to look at two things. We need to look at the end of World War I, and we need to look at the Great Depression. So that's what this video is going to do. It's going to look at those two things in general here. And it's important to note that I by no means am going to be able to cover everything in this short video, but it's going to set a nice foundation for us for the future of this little mini-series. So let's go ahead and let's jump into the end of World War I. World War I needs to be talked about because really World War II is an extension of World War I. Okay? The ending of World War I causes World War II. And we're going to look at why. And our why is really because of the treaty that ended World War I to begin with. It's called the Treaty of Versailles. Okay? Treaty of Versailles is this little peace treaty that was signed on November 11th, 1918 at 11 a.m., the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. World War I officially ends with a peace agreement between the Central Powers and the Allied Powers. Okay? Now, the Treaty of Versailles does 4 things, and guess what? All of them screw over Germany. That's how we get to World War II. Is these 4 things are going to screw over Germany. Are you ready? Number 1, Germany is forced to take all the blame for World War I. They just are. Okay? Britain and France force Germany to take all the blame. They completely ignore the fact that there were centuries of European rivalries at stake during World War I. They completely ignore the fact that there was all sorts of other complex world events that were happening that caused World War I. That could be an entirely separate video all on its own. If you want me to cover that at some point, leave me a comment down below. But yeah, essentially Germany is left with all the blame for World War I. They're like, Germans, this is on you. Okay? Super unfair. Okay? Second, Germany is left with a $33 billion bill that they have to pay back to France and Britain. Okay? They are left to pay reparations to the Allied powers for causing World War One. And they're the only ones that have to pay. 3. Germany has their army reduced. Basically, the Allies, Britain and France, put a cap on the German military. I believe it was 100,000 troops that Germany could have. Essentially, this was the Allies' way of keeping Germany weak. Basically, they're like, Germany, you've been messing with us for centuries and we're sick of it. And so now we're going to put some limitations on you so you don't cause any more trouble. Okay, that's the reason for that. Number 4, German territory is reduced. Essentially, Germany is stripped of all of her colonies overseas. So like in places like Africa and Asia, Germany doesn't get any of those anymore. Okay, Germany loses some territory to France on continental Europe. They are forced to demilitarize the Rhineland, which is this area in between France and Germany at the time. So there is all of that is basically left for Germany to deal with. And I know that through all of that, it made me sound like I was saying America wasn't involved. And really that's because we weren't. Okay? We were involved in the peace treaty, yes. But. The United States had a different plan for peace that the European allies were not a fan of. In fact, the only thing that is created based on the United States plan for peace was the League of Nations, which was supposed to be a world peacekeeping organization. It was going to be kind of their job to make sure no more wars broke out. Wonder how that went. So, I'm not trying to hate on Britain and France. I'm really not. But the fact of the matter is, Britain and France were kind of the brainchild of the Treaty of Versailles. They were the ones that were like, yeah, no, we need to punish Germany so that we can make sure that another world war doesn't happen again. So, that's kind of the reason I was like, oh, Britain and France did this. It's because they kind of did. Don't get me wrong, the United States has their own role to play in these world events. We'll talk about that in a future part of this mini-series. So I'm not going to be like, oh, United States was totally innocent all the time. Kind of, sort of, ish, maybe, maybe, not really. But with all of that, okay, with everything from the Treaty of Versailles, you have this this situation where there is a lot of anger, there's a lot of bitterness within the German people. Okay, some Germans were even calling to start World War I back up again because they were so mad at what happened in this peace treaty. Okay, essentially they were forced to sign this. They weren't really given a choice to sign this. And the German people kind of felt abandoned by their leaders, by their government officials. Okay? So we kind of have that in the back of our minds. All the issues resulting from the Treaty of Versailles. And what those issues lead to is a worldwide economic depression. Now, a lot of times in American education, at least, we tend to take the Great Depression and we put it in a box that makes it sound like this was an American event. And that's because the Great Depression does start with the stock market crash in New York City. So that's kind of how this whole thing begins. But it's important to note here that the Great Depression is sparked by the stock market, yes. But there's a lot at play during the 1920s that causes the Great Depression to begin with. Remember, World War I ends in 1918. Okay? The Great Depression doesn't happen until the start or the end of the 1920s. 1929 is when the stock market crashes. And in that time, most of the world is experiencing periods of economic growth, especially in the United States. This is a boom period for the American economy. And essentially what it all is, it's all fake riches, essentially. You have the expansion of buying on credit. You have all of these people that are basically buying now and paying later. You have all of this going on, so there's all of this kind of loan money floating around. And then you have this. This is a graphic that shows you the cycle of those reparation payments that Germany was having to make. You have Germany paying Britain and France. Then Britain and France are paying money to the United States, either through investing in businesses or paying us loans back for World War I. And then we're taking that money and we are loaning it to Germany so Germany can rebuild itself and essentially make its reparation payments. Okay? Well, all is well and good until the stock market crashes. Until all of a sudden Germany stops making her payments because she can't afford them. And what that leads to, when Germany can't afford to make payments anymore, that stops the foreign investment in American businesses. That leads to the economic collapse of the U.S. stock market, meaning that the flow of money stops, meaning Germany is not getting money from the United States anymore, meaning they can't make their payments, meaning that people aren't investing in overseas businesses in the United States anymore, meaning we can't send money to Germany, meaning it's a big spiral. And what that is going to lead to, it's going to lead to economic conditions across the globe, really in Germany, United States, Britain, France. It leads to a huge economic downturn. You have hyperinflation in Germany that basically makes the German mark, the type of currency used in Germany at the time, worth more as wallpaper than it is actual money. You have unemployment skyrocketing throughout Germany, the United States, Britain. You have people starving in the United States to the point where they have bread lines all across the United States. Things like that are happening all over the globe. So you have these conditions where there's a lot of people that are helpless. There's a lot of people that feel like they have been abandoned by their governments, that they aren't being listened to by their governments, that they aren't being helped by their governments. They are in some of the worst conditions that we have ever seen in worldwide economy. And it's a wonder why guys like Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin are going to be able to come to power. And that's actually going to be our focus for next video, is the rise of dictatorships, the rise of fascism around Europe and in Asia as well, in Japan. That's what we're going to look at in part 2 of this mini-series. So part 2 is going to be where we introduce the guy with a fashionable mustache. No, not me. Guy by the name of Adolf Hitler is going to be one of our focuses for episode 2. But I hope you learned a lot with this episode. If you have any questions for me, leave them down below. I'm happy to answer them. If you have any idea for what we should cover next after we're done with this mini-series, leave those down below. I'm happy to look at those, and I'm always looking for ideas. And I'll know a little bit more about how the series is going to go. I don't know if it's going to be like every other week or if it's going to stay monthly. We might be in World War II a long time if it's monthly. So I will make that decision by the next Coffee Corner. So stay tuned for that. If you like this video, though, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're not already. Leave me a comment down below. Lets me know what you're loving on the channel. And have a great day. We'll see you.